Welcome to another episode of Outspoken. We are in Women's History Month, but as always, we're not just here to celebrate, we are here to name power. Because when it comes to reproductive justice, history is not just something we reflect on, it's something we are actively shaping in real time. And one of the things we know is this: when Black women organize, the state responds. And the response is not random, it is a signal. It tells us where power is shifting, it tells us what is being protected, and it tells us what the state fears. Today's conversation is about what it actually looks like to confront state power and why reproductive justice remains more than just a word. It requires more than awareness. It requires organized, disciplined presence. But before we get into that, I want to introduce something that we're building new here at Outspoken and in our own voice. This week, we are launching our Creators for Change Council. This is a dynamic group of content creators who are participating within our own voice to advance reproductive justice through storytelling, culture, and digital influence. Because we know this: narrative shapes culture, culture shapes policy, and policy shapes whether our communities are protected. When harmful or incomplete narratives about Black women persist, they don't just live online. They shape real decisions about our bodies, about our families, about our futures. So the Creators for Change Council is about making sure that stories rooted in dignity, autonomy, and belonging are not just told by Black women, but they're amplified and they're understood. And as part of our Narrative Power for Justice work, these creators are helping in our own voice translate reproductive justice into everyday language. And so that you have more political literacy and that you understand how we are shifting, how people understand what's at stake. And today we're going to be kicking that off with somebody who is doing that every day. They are a trusted voice, a political educator, a creator who is helping thousands of people make sense of what's happening in this moment. Before we bring in today's guest, I want to take you to a special conversation I had with the one and only Elizabeth Booker Houston, also known as Booker Squared, on what the 2026 primaries are really signaling about what people need to know and what is still missing.
Well, hello, and I am so excited to be kicking off the Creators for Change segment of Outspoken with the one and only Elizabeth Booker Houston, better known as Booker Squared. Welcome.
Thank you for having me.
This conversation is about what we're watching during the primary season, what is being signaled, what is being missed, and how are Black women voters showing up in this moment. Not as just a turnout strategy, but what we actually are, which is a powerful governing force. So let's get into it. I want to get into this primary season. I know you have been on the road, and we're in this season where there's a lot of attention going to candidates, but what we're actually watching is how power is being tested, shaped, and signaled. And too often, Black voters are treated as a turnout strategy, and instead of what we actually are, which is the governing force. So I want to get into this today. When you're looking at the 2026 primaries, what are you seeing that people are missing most?
We are seeing people not really focus on what Black Americans are needing. I mean, just to be point blank period, although I think that's a consistent theme that we've seen here in this country. But we're seeing people start to think, well, maybe we don't need to center the voices of a lot of historically marginalized folks, and moving more toward this idea of, populist politics, which is great. We absolutely want working class people to stand together. We want that solidarity. But what we're also seeing along with that is what is known as class reductionism, where we're seeing folks who are saying they're so focused on class as the only thing to focus on, that we're not addressing the racism, we're not addressing the sexism, we're not addressing the transphobia, because those are seen as, and this is meant in a pejorative way, identity politics, as if working class is not also an identity, right? And so we're seeing a lot of that, and we're also seeing at the same time a lot of these communities push back and say, no, we don't need to put aside our issues and our struggles for equality and equity in the name of class solidarity. We actually need to have both going at the same time. We've had Black folks, we've had folks of different gender identities constantly have to put themselves on the back burner to the point of even enduring abuse and violence in the name of a movement.
Yes.
And that's not how it should be.
And I think that's why we say when Black women are actually pushed to the forefront, or actually no longer a second thought, we all win, because for so long we have been, pushed to the margin.
Right.
This sort of class reductionism, that is really interesting, because if I recall, quite a few people ran on the notion of working class.
They've run on the notion of working class, and it's, again, we should be. We should absolutely be talking about working class policies. But there are some folks, namely white people, some non-Black folks, but mainly white folks, who have done the whole class war is the only war thing, when that's not true. We know that's not true. I always say I cannot have class solidarity with somebody trying to lynch me.
Right.
That's not how that works.
That's right.
And there's, again, this pejorative use of the term identity politics, which is very discouraging, considering that term was coined by the Combahee River Collective, which is a group of Black women who use that term to say, no, this is how we highlight the intersectionality of various identities within these movements, and how if we focus on, what do they always say? If we focus on helping the least of us, everyone will benefit.
And I love that you called in Combahee, because that is so fundamental to the reproductive justice movement.
Yes.
Let's talk about a couple of the issues that are not being spoken. So that's things like bodily autonomy or family well-being. When we avoid those sort of terms, what does that signal?
Well, that signals an inability to address the issue. I mean, just point blank period. If we cannot talk about it directly, how are we going to solve it? We just saw, for an example of bodily autonomy, ProPublica have a huge investigative report where they found that Black women were being forced into C-sections, actually having judges on a laptop, and the laptop being brought into their hospital room to tell them that they no longer could labor in the way that they preferred in the hospital, and were now being court ordered to undergo a cesarean section that was unnecessary. That is fully stripping bodily autonomy. That is no longer allowing Black women to have control over what we say is best for us. And again, these are individuals who do not, what we call in law, have diminished capacity. That's not what we're dealing with. These are women who are competent, who are able to make decisions, and we're still having that decision-making authority stripped from them. And so when we don't talk about this head on, how are we possibly going to solve the issue if nobody's talking about the issue?
Yeah, that ProPublica article really speaks to something that Inner Voice is trying to shine a light on, which is narrative. What do candidates' narrative choices tell us about what they believe they're accountable for and what this current moment is presenting?
Well, their narrative choices tell us pretty much who they are and what they stand for. That is the best way to understand whether a candidate is actually going to be someone who serves us. And that is really key for Black women voters right now, because we are seeing a lot of candidates not talk about anything that has any sort of benefit to us. And I don't say that in a selfish way, like a benefit, like, there seems to be this idea that when we talk about benefits, it's as if equality is pie, right? We're asking for all of the pie so that nobody else can have the pie, when really that's not what equality is.
No.
Equality is something that everybody can have, and that's what Black women are looking for. And we are seeing some candidates completely overlook that. I mean, I have seen far too few candidates address Black maternal mortality in any of their platforms or their discussions. Black disability rights, we have not seen enough of that conversation. We're not seeing enough of the conversation of how the attacks on the Department of Education and the education system as a whole will hurt children but specifically black children at an even higher rate, especially black children who require things like 504 plans and IEPs, right? And so we are just not seeing these conversations come up. And if you have a president in office who has made it their entire mission to say, I'm going to attack diversity, equity, and inclusion, aka DEI, and we know they're talking about black folks, an administration in which people who were working with that administration created the DEIWatchlist.com, which was a list of a bunch of black women working in HHS to expose them and put them out as targets for harassment and violence, right? Why wouldn't our candidates respond with a direct answer, a direct solution to that? We shouldn't be talking around this issue. I don't know if that makes sense, but it's very frustrating to see very little conversation about DEI, very little conversation about the over 300,000 black women who were without jobs this past year. And we saw, again, black unemployment increase at a significant rate. And as Congresswoman Ayanna Pressley said to me when I interviewed her, we know that when white folks in America have a cold, black folks have pneumonia.
That's it, right.
And we really need to address this severe issue because it's going to eventually affect everybody in the country.
You are absolutely correct in that black women actually should be brought more into this conversation. Let's talk about black women as voters. How do we shift it from focusing only on us as turnout and actual decision makers?
Well, I think we need to have more black women just brought to the table. I mean, that's really what it comes down to. There should be black women working at different levels of campaigning. There should be black women who are helping to craft policy decisions, to help talk about things as simple as just outreach. I mean, if you want to reach out to black voters, ask black voters how to reach out. Ask black women voters how to reach black women voters, right? If you want to tap into that. We also just need to see a really intentional use of black women's time. I think that's very key. Don't waste our time.
Right.
Don't just bring us in for fluff or whatever you think is. Yes, very performative. Don't do that. It needs to be something that is intentional and something that is actually going to serve our community and isn't just for show. And this, I'm not talking about a particular party when I say this, because I know folks always immediately think of right-wing politics when they think of something or a space where black women are disrespected or time is disrespected. It happens on the left as well, over and over again, of being left out of the conversation, of being talked over, and then of being used like a prop to try to get voters in that 11th hour.
You were on the ground. What did it look like to meaningfully engage black women? How were we showing up?
Well, I had a great time meaningfully engaging with black women voters because we got to talk about things that just really mattered to us. We got to talk about, oh my gosh, everything from childcare issues to, again, what's going on with the job market that is affecting black women's employment. And of course, reproductive rights. That is a huge issue for black women in this country. I mean, the stories of women like Adriana Smith, those stick with us. Those are frightening, frightening stories. And to be able to sit there and make sure to center these concerns for black women, I mean, really, that's how it should be done. And I've had a good experience of just talking to different black women voters in different parts of the country as well. And while, depending on what region you're in, you might have some different concerns and things may vary, across the board, what black women are looking for is bodily autonomy, the ability to choose how we take care of ourselves, how we take care of our families, the ability to feed and clothe and house our families, the ability to have upward mobility with education and opportunities. Those are pretty consistent across the board. And I'm not understanding why we wouldn't center those needs for black women, because to be honest, those sound like things that would benefit everybody regardless of their race, ethnicity, or gender.
It sounds like, we are missing those opportunities, and it seems to be happening over and over again. And I'm not sure why we continue to misread there. That's happening on both sides of the aisles, right? Yeah. One of the things we have absolutely learned this year is that we must use trusted messengers to reach our communities. And one of the ways we're doing that is by working collaboratively with content creators. What are you all seeing and learning about increasing political literacy right now?
It's really all about just coming down to the basics, really just explaining things. I feel like in this space, you have a lot of people who are big political heads. They know the law, they know politics, they know the issues at a very granular level. And we have to remember to zoom out, and that the average American does not have that kind of knowledge. They're not looking at things that specifically and that narrowly. And so we need to start explaining basic civics, how different things work, how votes in Congress work. What does it mean to call your local representative versus the one who represents you at a national level? What issues do they cover? What are the big issues that are going on right now? There are things in legislation and policy points and all of this that kind of go under the radar and don't make it in the big splashy headlines. And it's really important for content creators to kind of parse those out, not just find, at least for me personally, what's popular and what's everybody talking about and what's viral, but what I think is important. And that is the power of influence. When people use the word influencer, you know, in reference to content creators, we're talking about influencing something. And so I always think, if my job is to be an influencer, my job is to find the topic that is important to me and make it viral. You know, don't wait for a viral topic to come around, because that's how we're going to increase political literacy, is everybody tackling the things that we feel the most comfortable talking about as well. I don't feel compelled to speak on everything at all.
That's what I was going to ask. So it's for you, it's not about speaking on every moment. It's about what you think is most important and what you want to make sure your communities understand.
Exactly, and where I can contribute the most to the conversation and to that topic. Sometimes I don't have anything worthwhile to contribute because maybe it's just not my area of knowledge or expertise or even interest. And so when you said the word collaborate and being collaborative, that's when I collab with other content creators or organizations to then essentially lend out my platform and my following for them to then share a message with them. And that is something that is a really great feature of social media that has been added in just the last few years, where you can collaborate with someone else and then their face and their story and their narrative is on your platform and being pushed to your followers. And I think that's really cool. So I really enjoy collaborating with other creators. I'm very excited and honored to be part of this council and connect with you guys at IOV as well as the other content creators more.
And I know a lot of them are already people that you are collaborating with, and that is one of the things I am most proud of, is that our Creators for Change Council is exactly that. These are individuals that are already aligned. This is stuff you deeply care about. We are not extractive. We are rolling up our sleeves and having thoughtful conversations about what does our community need to know, and how do we use our particular voice to get that to them, because we ultimately want them to be ready to be able to have an informed vote. So I know we started this conversation talking about the primaries and making sure our communities have the information. So I'm just going to close with one last question. What is one thing our audience should watch between now and Election Day?
Oh my gosh, just one thing?
Well, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Oh my goodness. So I think if there's one thing people should watch leading up to Election Day, watch what your friends and family are posting on social media too. I think that's really important. Don't just get online and scroll and find the people who are like the viral folks with the large following. And, you know, that's great. Please, yes, get the information. And then share that information. Watch and see how your community is talking about things. Like, get out there and really engage with your neighbors and the people around you, because I know it sounds very cheesy. I've heard so many people in this space say this, but it's very true. Everybody is an influencer in some way.
Absolutely.
Even if you're just influencing your book club or your grandparents or the people who are in your play group with your kids, it's really important for everyone to be watching what those around them are saying and doing as well, so that we could be accountable to one another.
Well, Elizabeth, I'm going to just end it there. That was great advice. And thank you for joining us for the first Creators for Change Council segment. And I want to invite you all to keep watching us, because we'll be having more of these fantastic conversations. And we're back. I hope you enjoyed that conversation as much as I did. And now I want to bring in two leaders that are doing exactly what we talked about. They are shaping
and they are working and they are fighting on the ground. Bridgette Jackson, who is Director of Policy at In Our Own Voice, and Jordan Cain, who is our State Manager of Policy at In Our Own Voice. Both of them have just returned from Tennessee for their SisterReach, which is our partner organization's Black Folks on the Hill Day. And what they have done is meet with people on the ground and do exactly what we talked about during that conversation with Elizabeth. Not just theory, not just abstraction, but what it actually looks like when Black folks show up organized and we in spaces where decisions are being made without us and for us. So Bridgette and Jordan, welcome.
Hey.
Thank you.
Well, let's just get right into this. Jordan, set the stage. What did you walk into last week?
Yeah, so in Tennessee, the Capitol, they're coming to the end of their legislative session. So the Capitol was super active, but you can also feel the tension across the whole building. This session in particular, there were a lot of bills that were moving that were directly attacking and trying to impact bodily autonomy, access to care, and pretty much just like safety for our communities at large. So, you're walking into an environment where harm is not just this abstract idea that we're talking about, it's actually being debated actively. And so you also have activists who are coming to the Capitol who are aware of what's at stake and ready to fight for their rights. So really bustling, really busy. It's also an election year, so you have legislators who are trying to push legislation through as fast as they can. So it was a crazy time.
And how many people were there? What was it like when they saw all these beautiful Black people showing up in the Capitol?
So our group for Black Folks Day on the Hill, there was anywhere from 40 to 50 of us, which is a really amazing group. And people recognized us. When we are on the Capitol, we bring a presence of, this is our message, you're going to listen to us. So we came in strong and people acknowledged us and people wanted to meet with us. Our champions wanted to meet with us. And then, those who may not be our champions tried to run from us, but we did get those meetings.
We didn't let them get away.
Yeah, exactly.
I want to come back to that because some people often think there is the whole mystique around going to the Hill. So we're going to talk about that. But Bridgette, there's a policymaking process that we engage in quite a bit. And there's a lot of misconceptions about that. What do you find that most misconceptions people have about how policy gets made?
I would say a big misconception is that policymaking solely belongs to the policymaker, and that's not true. It belongs to the people. And I don't know if people really understand the power that they have and the influence that they have. And a great example of that was the Advocacy Day. Having folks speak on all of these different pieces of legislation and really holding folks accountable. And also providing their own lived experiences is really important, not just for empowering our communities, but also for the policymakers themselves. So for them to really understand like the real world impact of that, as well as to hold people accountable, right? To say like, for the less friendly folks.
That's a good way of saying it.
I would say that it's important for them to hear from us as well and to hold them accountable and to say these are the real lives of these are the real people and the real lives at stake based on these policies. So
yeah, I often have to tell people, actually, they work for us, right? We put you in office. They have to answer our questions. And somehow, there's some misconception that they are untouchable. And we're working, I know, very hard to demystify that whole process. So you all were very much engaged in organizing. What would you say disciplined organizing actually requires, especially in spaces like a state capitol? And in disciplined organizing, what does that actually mean?
Yeah, so in spaces like the state capitol, it means that you have to be really clear about your goals. You have to know who your audience is. You have to know what your strategy is. You can't just go in there expecting to move people by just having a conversation. It has to be structured. And so you're not just reacting to what's happening day to day or what vote they're doing today. You're thinking about the long-term movement that you're building and what actions you're taking to make sure that that movement is sustained. So it really requires education. It requires clarity, consistency, all the things. But it also requires restraint. Not every fight is a fight that needs to be taken on at once or immediately, especially when the opposition or the less friendly folks are organized and they are well resourced. We have to come in knowing what we're fighting against and knowing what battles we are fighting that day. So for us this past week, it really was highlighting issues like bodily autonomy and maternal health care and knowing that these are the things that we're really strongly going for and this is how we're going to do it. So
Bridgette, anything you want to add to that?
I agree, specifically around the continued engagement portion. I think that Sharice and SisterReach is a huge testament to that. When we went to the Hill, to Jordan's earlier point, they knew who we were. They knew that we were coming. And I do think that it does require that long-term strategy that you were talking about as well. But just the way in which we engage with the policymakers themselves and them knowing that we support them, that was huge for them. They said many a times that they rarely see a group of Black people of this size coming to the Hill to advocate on reproductive justice issues, and that they really appreciated it and they wanted to hear more from us. So I do think that that continued engagement is critical as we continue to fight for reproductive justice.
Yeah, so you talked about the continued engagement, the strategy, which leads me to preparation, right? You didn't just wake up and decide you were going to do this. What sort of preparation went into planning this day?
So I believe Jordan touched on this a bit. We had lots of trainings, understanding the legislation itself, tracking those bills, and ensuring that we were ready to go whenever we were faced with the bills that we support, but also the ones that we oppose. And also knowing the policymakers themselves and what moves them was really important. So it took a lot of background, a lot of research, a lot of working with other coalition groups on the ground that have been doing this work for quite some time, along with SisterReach. And so in community, really putting forth a strategic plan for engagement with these members.
Yeah, I would definitely agree. And add on that we're bringing a lot of advocates up to the Capitol who, for some of them, it's their first time ever engaging with legislators. So really just making sure that they're prepared to speak to them as well and knowing the goals of the day.
So we were organized, and you said when we walked into the Capitol, people noticed. What do you think that communicated to the policymakers that present?
Yeah, I think it really communicated that we are here and that we're not going anywhere and that our community matters. And if they're not going to legislate in a way that seems like they care that we matter, we're going to come and make sure that they do so, and we're going to apply the pressure. This isn't just, an individual concern of, us here at Our Own Voice. This is community concern that's rooted in Memphis, that's rooted in Nashville, that's rooted in our larger communities across the country. So seeing a organized group of people come up to the Capitol really puts in their face, you are legislating for our communities. And here's a community right here, so answer to us. It really impacts how they view legislation. It puts a face to the legislation that they're seeing.
Anything you want to add, Bridgette?
I would just say it lets them know that we're paying attention. And to give just to give a bit of background as to what was going on at this particular time, folks in Memphis, we were busing up to Nashville when people were preparing for Trump to be in Memphis and the National Guard and everything else that's happening. And so it's very important for us to say that, our community feels unsafe. This is what we need from you. Here are the laws that we need passed. And here's what we need to feel like we can obtain reproductive justice broadly. And so, yeah, I do think that for this particular group of folks that were able to come up to the Capitol as well for them, for those folks that were brand new to advocacy and things like that, also getting the feedback that you're doing a good job, we're listening, we're hearing from you. I think that was also very empowering for our group too.
Let me make sure I understand this. You all took a bus from Memphis to Nashville. You got up early in the morning to do this. So these folks were serious. They weren't playing.
Committed.
Yes.
Wow. What was the conversation like on the bus?
So the bus was at 5 a.m. So there was some sleeping.
Yes.
But the conversation was, we're going over the policy, but we're also reminding ourselves that these legislators work for us. It is their job to legislate for us and also to speak to us and to hear our concerns. So it was really just reaffirming to our advocates that this is their time to shine. You have the floor. You are doing your civic duty by going to talk to your legislators, and you have every right to be there. So making sure that they feel empowered and making sure that they understand the importance of being at the state capitol.
Yeah, and then also I imagine telling your story. That's often the most powerful part of this work is, you don't have to know every law and bill and know and have tracked it through the legislative process. It's just putting the actual face to some of the issues. Anything else you wanted to add to that, Bridgette?
Just that SisterReach was very intentional about ensuring that everyone had a voice at the table. They were very intentional in ensuring that the young people that were there were able to ask questions and were able to, give their insight. And so I just really appreciate that. And it went across the board. So from eldest to youngest, everyone got an opportunity to speak and to be heard.
What were some of the things they were talking about?
So a lot of the things that we discussed, like I said, was bodily autonomy, as well as mitigating harm to our communities. So there were actually a large amount of anti-LGBTQ bills that are moving through Tennessee currently. And so we had our advocates speak to the harm that would be caused by that. Tennessee is situated in the Bible Belt, where a lot of these practices that are influenced by like religious autonomy, Christian nationalism, things like that. A lot of that is already in the cultural practice and causing harm to these communities. So we had different members, different advocates speak to the experiences that their community is facing in regards to that, and then what would happen should these laws be formalized.
So would that be something like comprehensive sex education, or what sort of, did they speak about a particular harm? Just want to kind of put zoom in a little bit more so that people watching kind of understand what some of the stories were.
So a specific bill that we met on was a bill that was being run by Representative Mark Pody. And this bill would essentially formalize a Christian prayer at the beginning of every school board meeting. And as mentioned, Tennessee is situated in the Bible Belt. A lot of institutions already culturally have these practices, but formalizing it kind of creates this environment where religion is law and more and beyond that, Christian religion is law. And that's, as we know, can be extremely harmful, especially when we start talking about bodily autonomy and once we start talking about LGBTQ rights and so on and so forth. So formalizing that would really harm our communities and sets the stage for more harm to be done. And we had advocates who were able to speak to what would happen down the line, especially.
Right. And I imagine because we are educating just to make sure that people understand all perspectives on these bills. I want to switch a little bit to, obviously we had an amazing Black Folks on the Hill Day. How do you keep that momentum going?
I would say, how do we keep the momentum going is to continue that engagement, like I mentioned earlier. The policymakers made it very clear, the state reps that we met with made it very clear that they wanted to hear from us, that they wanted to continue engagement with us, whether that's through state work or through national organizations that they're a part of, like the National Caucus of Black State Legislators. We met the president of that, of that. And so just, they don't know unless you tell them in some instances, right? And so until you're there,
they don't know unless you tell them.
I mean, yeah, right? Like, I think sometimes people do live in their own little bubbles. And so it takes folks coming to them and saying, like, do you understand the impact of this? Or this is how this impacts my child, or telling their story of how, they don't know, they
Someone may
had,
not have practiced the same religion as Jordan
correct,
mentioned, how it impacts those that have a different faith system.
right, or
Mhm.
maternal mortality and
Mhm.
things like that, or infant mortality, and just the things that they've experienced, right? And so how these bills either are helpful to them, because we did meet with some champions that were great advocates specifically on Black maternal health, for instance. And we also met with folks that were a bit harmful, right? And I think hearing from those folks and saying that this is actually how this bill harms the community that I represent, or this is how it harms me specifically.
Mhm.
And so I really appreciated it when people said that. For instance, there was we were speaking to someone about a bill that pertains to the pride flag. And they said, as a member of the LGBTQ community, this feels like you are trying to erase a part of me.
Mm.
And so that really sat deeply with me in that moment. And so I feel like I've kind of skirted around the question just a little bit, but
No, you did. I mean, we're talking about keeping the momentum, making sure that once you have an amazing Hill day, the point is, how do we apply the pressure, continue to apply the pressure, and make sure we get the impact? Because we want to actually win.
we
right?
do.
Mhm.
And so, after a day like that, what does actually winning look like?
In a state like Tennessee, I think wins look different,
Mhm.
right? Whether that be now we have a community. Now we've identified who the real champions are and what you need from us. And let's take that and go back and let's build on that. Sometimes the ones are small. Sometimes it's let's take this language out of this bill so that it's less harmful.
Mm.
Right. We've learned a lot about backdoor deals that are made because in Tennessee, a lot of our advocates are in the super minority, right? So what can actually get pushed through whenever the majority of the folks may not be friendly towards reproductive justice? So what does that look like?
Yeah. Anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, I would definitely add there are the policy wins and the stopping harm wins within policy for sure. But a win that we definitely saw in Tennessee this past week was building power within our communities. And, leaving that day, we had so many advocates who could really speak to feeling more empowered and wanting to take this information back to their communities and share it with their families and share it with their different networks. So that's a win as well, because now reproductive justice, the message of reproductive justice and all the talking points about all this legislation is now being brought back to the community, and we're building the movement even larger. So that's a win as well.
I like that. So I just want to, everyone's not an amazing superwoman policy person like the two of you all, but there are people who are very interested in these issues and want to make their voices heard. If someone is out there watching right now who wants to get more involved, who is just frustrated and has had enough, and they said, you know what, I'm ready to move to action, what is some things they could do? What's the first step they could take?
So I would definitely say find an organization in your community who is already engaging on the issues that you care about or that you're interested in. That is the easiest point of engagement, I believe. So we're speaking about SisterReach in Tennessee. They're already on the ground in Memphis and across Tennessee doing the work. So you can connect with them and volunteer with them and go to their education courses and whatnot, as well as whoever's in your community. But really committing to consistency over urgency. This is a long-term movement that we're trying to build, and it needs to be sustainable. So making sure that you're attending meetings, building relationships, and knowing the issue so that when it is time to take action, such as going to an advocacy day or going to a rally, you're ready to go and you have the talking points that you need and you have the ability to be the best advocate that you can be, and you can feel like you're being useful in that space. So really just building yourself up to do what you need to do.
I agree, Jordan. And I would say if the community like SisterReach doesn't exist within your community, then be intentional about building one for yourself, right? Build one of your own. And I think it starts with sharing your lived experiences and sharing what it is that your community needs and what you're looking for. And I think you'd be surprised to find that there are others around you that share similar desires. And I do think that once we become more disciplined in or intentional about reaching out to others and to building that space for others, we can continue to mobilize and build the movement that you talked about, Jordan.
Sure. Yeah, and even things as small as like social media influencing, as I know Regina was talking about with our new creator council, different things like that. There's different ways to engage. It doesn't have to be showing up to a rally or showing up to, the advocacy day. You can engage from where you are.
And you can also meet folks where they are as
Mhm.
well. And so I do think that having those conversations with your local, state, or federal representatives is super important. Share your story, share your voice. Your voice matters. And the narrative that you have and that you bring is super important as we continue to build on these policies and advocate for reproductive justice broadly.
Well, thank you, Bridgette. Thank you, Jordan, for that amazing conversation. And it's almost time for us to close. And before we close, I want to bring us back to something we've heard throughout this entire conversation today. First, it's that organizing is never spontaneous. It's disciplined, it's structured, it's intentional. And when Black women organize, the state responds. And that response is not just political, it is narrative. So before we close, I want to take you to the special moment that I'm going to be bringing to you in every Outspoken, which is a narrative power note. Because what we're seeing right now, especially in this primary season, is not just a political shift, it's a narrative shift. We are seeing candidates actively right now avoid direct conversations about race, about gender, and obviously bodily autonomy. And that really matters because when we flatten the narrative, we erase the conditions people are actually living under. What Elizabeth named earlier in this conversation is something we all have to pay attention to. When Black women's realities are treated as secondary or optional, it signals who candidates believe they are accountable to. And when issues like Black maternal health, bodily autonomy, religious freedom, economic stability are not named directly, it becomes easier to ignore them in policy. Silence is not neutral, it's a narrative choice. And narrative choices shape what feels possible. It shapes what we can solve. Who we also heard from today was that Black women are not just voters. We are decision makers. We are agenda setters. We are a governing force. So the intervention for you, the assignment for everyone is this. We have to insist on narratives that reflect the full complexity of our lives. We have to support the storytellers, the organizers, and the creators who are helping people understand not just what is happening, but why it matters and how it directly impacts you. And when you learn that, you have to tell somebody because organizing shapes narratives, narrative shapes policies, and policies shape what our communities receive, and they shape how we are protected, and ultimately, what we know we deserve. Reproductive justice is not just about access. It's about whether we are organized enough to demand protection, to demand that our human rights are not only respected, but affirmed, and to say that our stories are strong enough to move policy. So here's what we're asking you to do. We're asking you to support Black-led state advocacy efforts like SisterReach in Tennessee. We're asking you to follow and amplify our Creators for Change Council. You're going to hear more about that. Some of them are already posting about us right now. Follow us across all our socials to learn more. Stay engaged beyond Women's History Month. Keep the spotlight on our issues because this work does not end when the calendar turns. It continues in how we show up, how we organize, and how we tell the story. Because when Black women tell our stories, their stories change. The society changes, and we're all better for that. We're organizing because we want a future for us, We want a future for our families, and we want a future for our community. Thank you for being with us. Stay grounded, stay present, and above all, stay outspoken.